Welcome to the Production Talk podcast with me, Jan of mixartist.com.au. In this podcast series, we celebrate the modern way of producing music. We want to talk about all things related to songwriting, recording at home, and music production. So if you produce your music at home, this is the place to be. Please subscribe and recommend this podcast to all your friends. This is the Production Talk podcast, episode 55. Before the start of this episode, I would like to make two little announcements. First and foremost, our friend Russell Cottier from episode 26, a legendary UK producer, is offering an analog mixing course to all our podcast listeners. So if this is something you are interested in, head over to episode 26, have another listen, or go to this episode's show notes and click the link to check out what he's offering there. It's a really cool course. I checked it out myself. And if this is something you're interested in, I warmly recommend that. And secondly, I'd also like to let everybody know that I finally managed to move my studio into new rooms, and I'm very happy to operate now out of amazing big rooms in Mullumbimby in the east coast of Australia. I'm now working out of a massive control room, which has been designed by nobody less than John Sayers himself. And the studio also has 3 completely separate live rooms. So as I get ready to launch this studio, I'd like to invite everybody who's interested to please contact me. If you want to stop by for a cup of tea and just check it out, well, my email is jan@mixartist.com.au, and I'm looking forward to hanging out and showing this studio to as many people as I can. All right. Okay, that's enough about me. Let's move on to the good stuff. Here is my interview with Mr. Rod COE. Welcome back to another episode of the Production Talk podcast. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the country that we are meeting on today, the Arakwal people of the Bundjalung Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Blessed love. With me today is Mr. Rod COE, producer and bass player. Welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. Look, a couple of weeks ago, we actually met for the first time in the studio in a recording session, and you were playing double bass.
Yeah, it's an instrument that I'm very, very fond of, and I hack away at it and just have a good time and get to play with a whole lot of different people. So it's an enjoyable thing.
Well, I noticed straight away that you were right on top of it. You know, you were just mastering that instrument, and every note was played with so much control, so that immediately I knew that there is more to you that I want to ask. So that's why I invited you. How old were you when you started playing instruments?
Well, I learned a little bit of piano when I was 10, 11, a couple of years of that, as a lot of kids did at that age. Mm-hmm. Then I sort of gave it up, but then I went off to boarding school, and I really got interested in music there, and I sang in the school choir, and listening to the hit parade, you know, like in off times, and just really enjoying. This is I'm talking about like late 50s, early 60s here, and you know the music scene was getting really interesting in the early 60s, particularly. This is just before the Beatles, so I came up through with the Shadows and bands like instrumental bands, a lot of pop music, Cliff Richard and all that sort of stuff. And one of the real standout things to me that got me really interested in music was hearing Booker T and the MGs doing Green Onions, and to me that was like, oh wow, this sounded so powerful, and I really got interested in playing guitar, particularly at that stage, but that only lasted a couple of years, and I switched to bass. There were too many guitarists around. Yeah, right.
And whereabouts was that?
This is in New Zealand. I went to school in Christchurch. And worked there for 7 or 8 years before I came over to Australia.
Okay. And so you got into playing instruments, and then, you know, I guess you practiced a lot, joined bands. And
well, that was the thing. I didn't do much practice because,
really?
But I had a reasonable ear for working things out from what I heard on the radio, and of course, joining a band was the first thing. Getting in a band.
Yeah.
Because when the Beatles hit, it was like, wow, I wanted to be a Beatle. So, next best thing was just try and form your own band. So I just went along to, met as many people as I could that played and, just joined in, got involved.
Okay, and you were a young man at that time, I guess?
Yeah, I was. I would have been, 18, 19. Yeah.
Perfect time to get started.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
What advice would you have to musicians today who start an instrument and are right at the beginning? If you think back about the person you were back then, what advice can you give a younger musician who's at the beginning?
Gosh, that's a hard one. The things that I didn't do is practice, and I think that's the best advice you can give anyone, is that you'll never improve on an instrument unless you actually practice or play. Yeah. I suppose most of my practice was done actually playing in bands and figuring out bass lines from records, just rather than actually practicing the sort of technique things that most players should really be practicing, just to get their hands and their body into a good shape for for being able to play anything that comes into their head.
Yeah.
I didn't do that. I basically just went through developing my ear from listening to stuff, picking out bass lines, learning them, and just the thrill of playing with other people. That's a really important thing, I reckon. And a lot of players, or a lot of young people I see today, don't really want to get involved in, like putting a band together. And it's hard work sometimes, coordinating that sort of thing. But
that's
to me,
true.
it's the best. It's the best learning experience, because the thrill of it when you play together and when it really comes off is just magic.
Yeah, you're definitely right. A lot of young musicians nowadays work in their bedroom all by themselves, which has pros and cons. And
absolutely,
I guess, the pros, you don't need to argue or you don't need to make compromises.
Yeah.
But, I guess, there's also music as a language, speaking an instrument and, throwing lines forward back and vibing of one another.
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah, that's an important part, isn't it?
Yeah, and also the fact that often a good band will sound much bigger than the sum of its parts. You know what I mean? So you get the sense of power from it that doesn't just come from you. It comes from the fact that you're all doing it together, which is just wonderful.
Yeah, fantastic. Tell me more about the bands that you've been involved with.
Well, I started off, the first band I was in was actually a trad band, and I was playing electric bass in a traditional Dixieland type band. We used to call them trad bands in those days because there were a lot of English. They called themselves trad bands. Kenny Ball, Ackerbilk, Chris Barber, a lot of those English trad bands, were on the hit parade, and you'd hear them all the time. And that's the classic lineup of, drums, bass, piano, banjo, trumpet, trombone, and clarinet, and maybe a singer as well. So that was really good fun, and you learn, because a lot of the material is old material, and it's like the Great American Songbook sort of style stuff, only even earlier than that. So you get to learn a lot about music too, and the structure of those sorts of songs, which is interesting, the structure of harmony.
Okay. And were you able to translate that knowledge and that skill to other genres?
Well, yeah, because my main interest were rock and roll, but that was a band that formed because I had friends who were, a friend who was a sax player and a friend who were a drummer, and that was the music they liked. Yeah. So I just went along with that too. But I was listening much more to rock and roll, and certainly working out rock and roll bass lines. Playing hard, trying to play hard, trying to play, sort of much more aggressive, I suppose, than that sort of music required. Nevertheless, it was a great grounding musically.
Okay. Fantastic.
After that, I joined a rock band, and I've been fortunate, I suppose, in a lot of ways where the bands I've been in have generally gelled fairly quickly and fairly easily, without a lot of the issues that bands often go through, like personality stuff and stuff like that. So I've had good experiences generally in bands, and that keeps your enthusiasm going too, of course.
Of course, yeah, of course. Yeah. I can imagine that's probably not always easy, There's also situations of conflict, usually at some stage.
Yeah.
How do you work through something like this? If there is a clash of, opinions or creative ideas?
I usually just gave way.
Okay.
No,
that's not the answer I expected. No. But okay.
No, I think it's. I guess I'm not the sort of person who's ever going to be a great band leader, because I don't really want to lead. I'm very happy being a bass player and just going along and just doing my bit to make the whole thing sound good. So I suppose that reflects my personality, and so therefore I'm not really going to go sort of head to head with anyone and get into conflicts that I can avoid.
Yep.
So for me, it wasn't difficult at all, really, and I never came across too many people in band situations who I couldn't deal with.
Oh, good. Yeah, fantastic. I guess that's what one learns when being in bands too,
It's part of it too, It's how to actually maintain that. The primary focus of the band has got to be the enjoyment of the music.
Yes.
And if it becomes about personalities, then it's not working, really.
Mm-hmm. Well said, well said. Look, you also have experience in other genres. Is it correct to say that you've produced some punk in your earlier life as well?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah. And I think that there you're referring to the Saints.
Yes.
The Saints' first album.
Legendary band.
And the Saints were a Brisbane band, a punk band, great punk band, who came out in the middle of the Joe Bjelke-Peterson era of state government in Queensland, and they were very, very anti that. Mm-hmm. They recorded a single called Stranded in, I think, about 1976 with a Brisbane engineer called Mark Moffat, who made a great job of that single. They sent copies all around the world. English music press picked it up.
Wow!
Someone reviewed it as the single of the year. EMI Australia, who I was working for at the time, then got a missive from EMI England saying, "Get onto this group. Why haven't you signed them yet?" So we got in touch with them, and I, as one of the staff members, the production staff members at EMI in Sydney, was sent to Brisbane to record the band and get them to sign a deal. They were obviously quite happy to do that. So we spent 2 days in the studio, and it was the rawest experience I've ever had, I think. It was just a little boxy little studio, concrete block, not much in the way of the monitoring wasn't very good. I remember that particularly because I found it really hard to hear what was going on. And so we just set the band up in the studio, not too much isolation or anything. And the guitarist, Ed Cooper, played through a double stack PA.
Oh, wow.
And was really, really loud. And his style was just constant. It was like a buzzsaw, the whole thing.
Oh, of course.
So, and the singer, Chris Bailey, was great. He had a real swagger to him. So anyway, we just went in there and did take after take after take of their, probably only 1 or 2 takes of every song. At the end of 2 days, we had an album basically, which I then took back to EMI in Sydney to mix.
You recorded that in 2 days?
Yes, yeah.
Wow, that's fast.
Well, that was that was what you did in those days. We're talking analog, we're talking multi-track. Everything just goes down, and that was a band that didn't need pre-production or anything.
Right.
It wasn't a band that you needed to say, "Oh, why don't you try this part or overdub that or whatever."
Okay.
It was just what it was, and that was what we were trying to do, just capture that energy, which we did, I think.
As a producer, you actually didn't work on arrangements or instrumentation parts at all, or lyrics.
No,
with the band. You just left it as raw as it was, and
I flew into Brisbane, having never met the band. Met up with them at the studio, and we started making the record, and that was it. So it was sort of unheard of, really. But that was the way. It was sort of the way things operated in those days too. You didn't need to go to great lengths to pre-package stuff and make it all as glossy as you could.
Yeah,
certainly not in that genre. And I'd been playing in a sort of a punk rockabilly band in Sydney for the couple of years leading up to that. So I had a fair idea of what sort of energy it needed to be and how raw it needed to be too. Yeah. And I loved it. When I first heard the single Stranded, I loved it. I thought it was great. And comparing it with the Sex Pistols and things like that, I thought it had a real authentic rough edge, which a lot of the English punk didn't have, because to me it was a little bit overproduced.
Oh, okay.
So, that was my comparative view of where the Saints were, and I was determined. I think also at the same time there was a bit of a reaction, because in the Australian scene there was the Little River Band were big, and there was that push towards that really glossy harmony, big sounding, almost a West Coast sound in what was coming through in Australia. So I reacted a bit to that too, I think, in my embracing the the sort of the punk thing.
Fantastic. Yeah. So then you just flew back with the tapes in your backpack, I guess, and
I can't remember whether I had a backpack. I think I might have had a briefcase in those days.
Okay, yeah.
So anyway, we got back to Sydney, And I went into one of the studios there with I think it was with Richard Lush, who was an ex-Abbey Road engineer, one of the many brilliant house engineers at EMI Records. And they had 301 studios in those days. They actually owned the studios. It was before it became 301. I think it was just called EMI. Yeah, just EMI. So, we spent... we didn't spend a lot of time mixing, but I remember particularly trying to make sure that the effect of the record was you had this really loud guitar in the front of everything, and everything else was a little bit behind that. So you had to really listen to hear what was going on, and somehow let the guitar wash over you or past you and get into what was behind it. But the initial blast that you heard was guitar, guitar, guitar. So it was like I don't know how to describe it. I just wanted that to be the sort of thing that would really annoy some people who wouldn't get it, but it would be well worth the effort to sort of go beyond the initial, onslaught.
Yeah, right. And, looking at the time, that was rather unusual. That was not something people were used to.
No.
While today we've seen grunge, we've seen heavy metal and all of these genres, so we're somewhat used to really loud guitars, but it was a bit of a new direction, wasn't it?
It was in a way, and I remember going to an EMI. EMI used to have their conferences every year and talk about what the trends were and what was going to happen. And I remember that question coming up: is what do you think is going to happen in the next few years? And I think this was 1976, and the general prevailing opinion was that it was the Little River Band's style and era that was going to be happening. But I said what I thought at the time, which was, no, I'm sure punk's going to have an influence here too. It's not going to be just that. So, and that basically, punk did definitely change the scene.
Definitely, yeah. Did you experience any pushback from executives or so for heading into a new direction, doing unusual things?
I could tell. EMI was a pretty staid company. They were very conservative, and I could tell that a lot of people didn't get it. And in fact, the impetus for signing the band in the first place had come from England, which was much more aware, I think, of the potential of punk. So I didn't really expect anything to happen much commercially with that album, and it. If anything, the record, I don't think the record sold all that well, like not in terms of, chart success or anything like that, but the band was working around Sydney by that stage and probably all over the country and creating a real name for themselves. So that, it became almost underground. Yeah. Funny thing was, I didn't think much more about it, but I remember going into London in 1980, and I thought I'd go and visit Abbey Road, and I walked in and someone said to me, I said, "Oh, hi, I'm Rod Coe, I'm from EMI Australia." And someone said, "Oh, you're the guy that did the Saints album." And I was going, yeah. Like, to them, that was what I was somebody because I'd done the Saints album. I mean, I'd never thought of it like that,
Great. Yeah. That's fantastic. And we sort of skipped the beginning of the story. How did you actually end up at EMI?
Well, that was I'd come over. I'd spent several years working in New Zealand as a television technician, getting into technical production of TV shows, and I'd gone through all the camera work and the CCU and sound and all that, lighting, all that sort of stuff. So after a while I got sick of that, and I really wanted to concentrate a bit more on music, so I spent a year in Australia just doing odd jobs and playing in bands, and that was a fantastic experience because that was during the American R&R period when they were fighting in Vietnam and coming to Sydney for their R&R. So there were a lot of sailors around with lots of money and lots of music venues, and things were really happening. So that was great. I had a great time for a year. Went back to television in New Zealand, did another 3 years over there, just sort of getting into it and playing in bands. I played in a local band at that stage. We had a national hit, and that then gave me the impetus, I think, to want to come to Australia and just concentrate on music and do nothing else. So that was all right. I came to Australia and hooked up with an old flatmate of mine from Christchurch who happened to be working at Warner Brothers. And he also knew the boss of EMI. Good friends with the boss of EMI, evidently. So he suggested to me that I audition for this job that was going at the time as a house producer. And in those days, they had an A&R department with a head of A&R and 3 house producers working under them. And they had about 45 different acts all signed up and, turning over records all the time. So there was plenty of work. So I applied for the job, and much to my surprise, I ended up getting it. So and that was it. I think that my experience in television in New Zealand, and the fact that I'd done a bit of recording work as a bass player, stood me in good stead in getting that job. But the other thing I think too now, looking back on it, is that, and I didn't realise this so much at the time, is that production is a people job. It's a job about people, and I think having the right sort of demeanour is also helped me get the job too. So I think that was a part of it in hindsight.
Well said. Well said, yeah. I couldn't agree more, actually, in all honesty. I think that's even more important than all the technical side. But can I just steer back for a second? Just a few moments ago, you mentioned that, that's fine. A couple of moments ago, you mentioned you had a national hit in New Zealand. Can you drop any names? What was the band's name? What's the song title? I want to look that up.
Those were the days when you could nick... because there was a sort of time delay between a record being a hit in England and then the local branch of the record company would get it maybe a week later, but then their release schedule might take 7 or 8 weeks before it got released. So what would happen sometimes is the record company would say to a local band, here, you do a version of this and we'll get it out before the English release and see if you can have a hit with it,
Oh, really?
So that's what happened to us. I was playing in a band called The Revival out of Christchurch, and we signed to HMV in Wellington under Peter Dawkins, who was a great producer up there and eventually came to Australia. And he picked out a song, I think it was by The Equals, called Viva Bobby Joe. We went into the studio, recorded that with a B-side, and it got released, very quickly, and it just got a lot of airplay. So
cool.
We did okay. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Look, that's an amazing feeling, I guess, when you hear your own music on the radio.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting feeling. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And you become a bit of a local celebrity.
Yeah, of course. Fantastic. Then, at a different stage of your career, you also gained a lot of experience in other genres, such as country, as a musician. Can you expand on that? Can you fill us in what happened there? How did you get into country and how did you make your connections? Then you ended up pretty much at the top of the country game. Walk us through, please.
Now, in those days, when I first joined EMI as a producer, they probably had probably 7 or 8 major country music stars amongst their stable of artists. They had everything. They had string quartets, they had pipe bands, they had opera singers, they had all sorts of things. It was such a varied roster of artists. And of course, you got experience across all those genres, just working with these people from different genres. And I worked with people like Reg Lindsay and Johnny Ashcroft and Rick and Thel and some of these old names, Tex Morton, Chad Morgan, people like that. And then I actually got called into a session one day. I wasn't producing. Peter Dawkins was producing Slim Dusty. And I was downstairs in my office and he rang me up and said, come on up, we need a bass player on a couple of tracks. So I went up to the studio and played bass, and it was a Slim Dusty album, Lights on the Hill. And so I played on the couple of tracks that he wanted me to play on and thought nothing more of it really. Met Slim, good bloke. We talked horses for a little bit, because I'd grown up on a farm too. So, and then not long after that, he had a backing band from New Zealand called the Hamilton County Bluegrass Band, and they wanted to make an album too. And they'd already made lots of big albums in New Zealand, but they were working in Australia. And so I got the job as a house producer at EMI of producing their album. Now, this is a bluegrass band, and it's not something that I'd sort of had any experience with before, but it's music, it's all music, and they were really good at it, and it was just, there's something really fetching about that bluegrass thing too. You've got banjos and fiddles, and they were all good players, So we made an album in the studio, and then they enjoyed, the working situation was really good. We all had a good time together. They then recommended me to Slim, and at the time, fortunately, Peter Dawkins, Slim's producer, was going over to festival music, changing labels. So all of a sudden there was an opportunity. So Slim decided to give me a try, and we made an album together, and it was an album that had been almost fully recorded, but Slim wasn't happy with it.
Oh, right.
It was a bush ballad album, and he'd felt that that the recordings they had made of the songs had gone a little bit too far into pop music with hand claps and that sort of stuff, too much of a production thing. So when he and I got together, we sort of stripped it all back, reapproached the songs with much more of an acoustic sort of a vibe to it, and re-recorded the album. And that was called
from scratch, or did you keep?
No,
some
we
of it?
kept 2 songs, which he really liked the treatment of, and the rest. So it was a 12 song album. So we recorded those 10 songs again that he wasn't happy with. So that was the start of an association, which then lasted 28 years.
Wow. So you worked as a producer and also as a bass player for Slim Dusty.
I didn't work as a bass player for Slim Dusty immediately.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
The bass playing for Slim came along much later, once my kids had grown up a bit and I could actually go on tour.
Okay.
But at the time, it was like, I just took over his studio stuff, hired in the best bass players we could find, or in the case of the Hamilton County Bluegrass Band, they were doing the backings for the first couple of albums. After that, it was a matter of just finding the session musicians that understood the genre, and it's a very strict genre. Yeah. That Slim Dusty style bush ballad music. It's like it's the lines are laid down and you stick within them, and you bring in ideas as much as you can to try and colour the whole thing in a different way. So everything sounds as fresh as you can make it, but at the same time there are rules. There's certain things you don't do. And Slim was at the peak of his career when I came on board, so it wasn't difficult at all. He knew exactly what he wanted. He knew how he could do it. He's the best rhythm guitarist I'd ever heard. Just an amazing player, and of course he could sing. He could sing and he could write, and his wife could write as well. So it was all set up, and I just came in and rolled with it really. But it was great. I loved the music. I loved the genre. I think that style of country music is still very close to my heart, and I am still involved in playing shows with the Slim Dusty Band, even though Slim's not around anymore. But we still do shows of all Slim's material with the same band.
Wow, fantastic! Well, help me out quickly. How long ago did he pass away? That's been
Slim passed in 2003.
Yeah, right. So it's almost 20 years.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but the core of the band, the Travelling Country Band, which is what Slim called the band, and what I eventually joined in 1988 or 87 actually, has always been a sort of like a family unit in a way. And Slim and Joy, his wife, always promoted that feeling within the tours that we were part of a family. We and they didn't choose idiots as part of their team either. So it was good, and we've always maintained, through all the different permutations of the band, the relationships are always, still there and strong, and it's like we just feel like you're part of a special band, a special gang.
Wow,
it's great. It's a great feeling.
Oh, fantastic! That sounds amazing. Say, when you work for high-profile artists like this and major record companies like EMI, I guess once you're in the studio, there must be a lot of pressure as well. Time pressure, financial pressure. How do you manage nervousness in situations like this? How do you really get the absolute best take out of a musician who comes in? Everybody knows we're on the clock. The dollars are literally clicking by every minute. There must be a lot of pressure there. How do you get people to perform just naturally and without worries and from the bottom of their heart?
Gee, that's a big question. I don't know. I've never really thought about that and how pressure impacts on your sort of demeanour in the studio, I suppose. I was very fortunate being on staff at EMI, where I had the backing of a major corporation with plenty of money, with sales, with marketing, all the promotions, all the departments working together to take the pressure off, really. So in those early days when I was on staff at EMI, I didn't really feel a lot of pressure, except that I put pressure on myself because I didn't know what I was doing, really. I was new to it. It was a job I'd never done before, music production, although I had tentacles in it. But all of a sudden I'm responsible for making a product, like an album. Okay, and now we've got to record, mix, and finish, and put together 12 tracks that make a coherent whole, and it's got to be the best. You've got to please the artist, you've got to please the record company, there's all that. I didn't really... how do I put this? I suppose there was pressure, but I didn't really acknowledge it as pressure. It was more like, I love working,
Okay.
And you just sort of do it.
Yeah.
And in the studio, when you're in the studio, those pressures disappear because you're making music.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? It's like
Yes.
you're sort of, you're in the moment of hearing a really good take, and then thinking, well, maybe we can do one even better, and just the enthusiasm rises, and everyone gets involved, and the momentum of the whole thing just carries you along.
Wow. Okay. And what's the best ratio between, technical workflows in the studio and just purely creative workflows? You need to manage very technical tools, but at the same time, they also don't really count, because all that really counts is what we feel when we hear music. Did you find this is a difficult thing to manage at times?
Yeah, I suppose so. But one thing I forgot to mention is that when I was on staff at EMI, of course, we had engineers.
Yes.
So I wouldn't go in the studio and have to work a desk. I'd just sit back, listen, talk to the musicians, talk to the engineer, say, yes, I like that sound, I don't like that sound, or can we make this a bit thicker, or why don't we try a bit of organ in there, or whatever. So those were the decisions or suggestions I was making, because, I suppose you do start off tending to make decisions about those things and hope that what you suggest works. But as experience kicks in, you also realise that you only need to suggest things when things aren't going well. You don't need to sort of put your oar in and stir all the time. You can just sit back, sometimes listen, let people do their thing, and so on and so forth.
Oh, well said. Okay. Look, I guess those days are pretty much gone, where people actually had an engineer's role and a separate engineer. And, in some situations, an extra tape operator as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right.
So nowadays, people commonly produce all as one person, operating the gear, sometimes being the musician and also the producer.
Yeah.
What difference does it make? Have you worked like this in, more recent times?
I did. I remember I made one album once where I became the engineer, and I needed help from another engineer to help me through it too, but someone else was producing. But that's the only other experience I've had of being on the other side. I've never actually produced and engineered an album together. My feeling about it is that a producer it's really good to have a separate producer, because you've got a separate set of ears. Yeah. And then you can allow the engineer to concentrate on what they've got to do. They can produce as much as they want within the context of, as long as they're doing the engineering. But just the extra set of ears to just see more of an overview, slightly different perspective, whatever, I think that's really valuable in record making.
Okay. Yeah. Good. That makes sense. Let's talk about, playing live shows. You probably played, I guess, a large number of shows in your life.
I've done lots.
Probably lost count.
Still doing lots.
You are still playing live.
Oh, yeah.
How much do you play these days?
Oh, usually, every weekend, usually. I'm playing in about 7 different bands at the moment here in the Byron area, the sort of Northern Rivers area. So, yeah, I'm happily retired and enjoying my hobby.
Well, that's a nice hobby to have.
It's wonderful, yeah.
Do you still get nervous?
Yeah, I do. I do sometimes, and it's not predictable what I'm getting nervous for, but sometimes I'll just sense that I'm perhaps not in the right headspace for being about to go on stage, and and often that sense is borne out in the fact that it might be a slightly, I say slightly, probably more than slightly subpar performance, but it's about I think like in my case at the moment, because I'm trying to be across so many different repertoires, that sometimes scatters my brain a little bit, and I'm perhaps not as focused on the particular gig I'm doing as maybe I ought to be. But that's the only thing. I mean, it's not real butterflies in the stomach, and I have to vomit before I go on or anything like that. But I've never been like that.
Okay, good.
I've always been reasonably sort of confident that I can do, if not a great job, at least a good job.
Okay. I guess you've probably met all kinds of different venues, or been to all kinds of different venues, different audiences, and you've probably also seen the entire range of very experienced sound engineers, but probably also amateurs, which I guess can lead to quite a few challenges. How involved do you get with, stage sound? You've got the producing and engineering background, but then you're just a bass player. So can you step away from it and say, I'll leave you alone? Or do you need to get involved and tell the sound engineer what they're doing wrong?
Well, it's a funny thing. I've played in a couple of bands where the guitarist or someone else in the band has also been a sound engineer, and they haven't been able to step away from the sound issues, and they might run out to the desk and go, here, try this in front of the guy that's doing sound. And to me, that's like... That's an absolute no-no, because it takes away from your role, which is to be a performer.
Yeah.
So I've never had any difficulty in just stepping back and going, I'm the bass player. I love the role of being a bass player.
Okay.
So, and I certainly don't think, because I have a non-engineering background, that I know better than any front of house guy. I know to turn the feedback off, but other than that.
Yeah, right.
So, I'm very happy in that role of being, I'm there to do a job as a bass player, and I'm there to think about the music and play music with other people. And I don't want to have to know about that other stuff, the peripheral stuff, unless it becomes a really awkward situation where it's impinging on, if I can't play because I can't get a sound, then I will have to get involved to try and clear things up. But it's very, last resort stuff.
Yeah, I see. And do you still play electric as well as double bass?
Yeah, I play both. Play electric and double. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, double basses can be temperamental on stage.
They can be. Yeah.
So, what is your suggestion? And what's the best thing you can do to prepare yourself to get a good stage sound? What can you do from as a musician?
I think you've got to be prepared to sort of grit your teeth and play through what might be not as good a sound as you used to when you're playing at home, practicing by yourself or whatever.
I see.
So you just do your very best at sound check, I think, to make sure you can hear yourself, and particularly with double bass, that you can hear your pitch. Because if you can't hear your pitching, then you're going to be all over the place.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you've got to be very careful of, I think, too, is just making sure that you're not sort of overdoing the bottom end with double bass. Double bass is, I've been on festival stages where the front of house guy thinks the double bass should sound like an electric bass, or or alternatively just wants to show everyone how good his subs are. And you get this incredible flubby sort of messy bottom end, which just does not work with double bass. You've got to be able to. Double bass is a much more percussive instrument than electric bass, and you want to be able to hear that attack on it.
Yes.
So you actually get the where the note lands, not just
the string
like
sound
that,
is so important.
Yeah, I agree. So that's something that I'm always aware of on stage, is trying not to overdo the bottom end. I want to hear some bottom end. I want to feel it, but I don't want it to go on and on.
Okay.
It's like there's a certain envelope to double bass sound that I want to hear, and that's. Other than that, I think double bass is one of those instruments where you just got to keep practicing it.
Yeah. Because
there's no frets, and you've got to be confident that your hand positions are going to be are going to take you where you want to go.
Of course, yeah.
So if you've got that, that's your backup. If your sound's not great, if it all of a sudden, the front of house is interfering with the stage sound or whatever, then at least so you know where you are because you've practiced.
From muscle memory.
Muscle memory,
yeah. See,
right.
So do you usually go through an amp?
Yes, I do. I usually do. I use on my double bass, I use a realist pickup, which sits below the bass side foot of the bridge, and that is a fairly low level signal, but it's a nice tight round sound. So that seems to suit my bass, and at the moment I'm putting it through just a Fender Rumble, and that really, with a 15, and that works really well for me. It's just a nice warm sound. I can hear the bottom end. I'm probably not getting enough top end out of it, but that's okay, because if I keep my ear close to the fretboard, or the fingerboard, I should say, isn't it, on the double bass, I can usually hear the top end well enough. But prior to that, I used to use an Underwood pickup, and that was much more prone to getting feedback, and so I'm very, very happy with the other one, the Realist.
Got it. So the choice of pickup had a big effect on how temperamental it became on stage. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
So you've got the amp sound basically as your backup, I guess. If
that's my stage sound.
Yeah, right. So you don't rely on foldback speakers as much.
No, there have been a couple of festival stages, particularly where foldback is important for double bass, because just the fact that you're outdoors, bigger space, all that sort of stuff.
Exactly. But the distance between musicians is huge.
and you usually can't hear front of house too.
Yeah, that's right.
And in a room, that front of house can be really important when you just to spread the sound a little bit more. You know, if you're hearing a little bit of front of house, it's nice.
Have you experienced, or have you started playing with in-ears?
With
in-ear monitoring? Is that something?
No,
you've
I've never
tried?
used that. No,
okay.
No, I've always had to put up with loud monitors. No, that's something that when I was working with Slim Dusty, he tried it once or twice. Because he liked stage volume for his acoustic guitar and vocals, and often it was that thing of where you're always on the verge of feedback, and it's too dangerous. So it was recommended that he try in-ears, but he just didn't like the feel of it or the sound of it, and also the fact that it disconnects you to some degree from the audience. I think he could have got used to it, but
It's
at
a story.
a certain stage in your life, you go, why bother?
Yeah, exactly. I've heard this so many times. We actually had that discussion many times on the podcast. And,
Yes.
I think everybody agrees that when people switch to in-ears, it puts them out of their comfort zone for quite some time. And you got to stick with this for long enough to break through it. And then eventually you get used to it. And you read the benefits at the end of it. But
that's right.
The first time you use it, it's just like walking on eggshells in some ways. It's really weird.
Yeah.
Okay, it has advantages. You can just run around on stage. You carry your own sound.
Absolutely,
it stays with you,
and you can control it too.
Exactly, you can turn it up or down as you like. There's lots of advantages.
I agree. Yeah,
that one can have there. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Most people are using it these days, and it is a good idea.
Yeah,
because it saves ears apart from anything else.
Okay, look. You've worked through so many decades of musical history, and as a musician, as a producer, you've got so much experience there. What's the future going to bring for us, for the music industry? What are your predictions?
Industry. Well, it's the music industry is not something that's ever really interested me, if you know what I mean. I see myself as a musician and as a sort of a music creator, I suppose, but it's not. The music industry has always been something which I suppose I've just shied away from, because I'm not a businessman. Do you know what I mean? I don't feel that that's something I can ever get my head around and have an effect on. So I don't know. I've just got no idea what's going to happen in the music business. I'm the wrong person to ask. Really.
Okay.
I'm just very happy meeting musicians, playing with them, trying to create good noise, and giving people a good time. There's a lot of hunger to see music, to hear music, to go out and hear music at the moment, particularly after COVID.
Exactly.
And that feeling that you get from a hungry audience is just wonderful.
It is,
when you're doing a gig and people haven't seen live music for a while, and the joy is just palpable. It's a lovely thing. So industry, no, forget it.
Okay, so you're saying that your love for music just stands by itself, and the hunger for music is just something that's we probably will never die. That's
I think that's the case. Music is such a it's probably an underappreciated part of our sensibilities. In that. It's hard to sort of quantify. You can't touch it. It's just one of those things that produces a feeling that goes way beyond what our normal five senses will bring us.
Yeah.
And it's like poetry, I suppose, and dance too. I mean, there's so many of those artistic things that touch a part of you that the everyday world, the business world, the industry doesn't have anything to do with. So it's that's sort of that's what interests me, I suppose, more than anything else, and the fact that if you can connect with people on that that deep, joyous level, that's enough. That's enough.
Yeah. I guess you're right. Yeah, you're right. Let me push you a little bit more, if I may. With so much experience today, a lot of musicians who start out young find themselves in a bit of a difficult situation, starting out, their musical career on stages, and quite often people are asked to perform for very little compensation and simply just sometimes for exposure. Should young musicians do that? Should they say sometimes no to gigs if there is really no money in it? What is your take on that?
I think that's a case-by-case basis. I think generally my principle would be no, not for exposure, because to me that just sounds like a rip-off.
Good,
but I'll do benefits, like if someone's got a benefit and needs to raise money for a cause, I'm happy to do that for nothing.
For charity,
or charity. Generally, though, I will want to be paid according to what I think my work is worth, and I don't mean big money or anything like that. I just think that there's got to be a respect in the transaction.
Yes,
and I think for young people, I don't see why they can't get their own exposure without having to sort of rely on someone else to provide it. Because the social media, all the avenues are open to everyone basically.
Yes.
So I don't see any advantage really. Now, having said that, I'm not across all the ins and outs of social media. And I'm sure there are some advantages with connecting with some people who have big followings and can, allow you to access that following. There's probably all sorts of reasons why you could say yes to that. But I think you've got to be very astute about what is valuable to you, and what gives you value for what you're giving.
That's a good point.
So that's all I could say to that, really.
I like that you brought up the word respect here, because I find it very disrespectful for some businesses or venues to ask for musicians to play without any compensation.
Yes, it's completely devaluing the creativity of it.
Yeah, I agree. So look, I'm always for in favor of everybody pushing for certain minimum standards there, so for free shouldn't happen unless there's a very good reason.
It's the state of live music is like some gigs that I'll do them, but really because I want to play with the guys I'm playing with, but I'm not getting paid any more than I was 40 years ago. So to me that's wrong. The whole thing is wrong. Like I've put 40 years of experience from that time to now, but I'm still getting the same money for it. And I mean, the alternative for me is, okay, don't play. But to me, that's not an option.
Okay. Yeah. I see.
Now, someone more hardline than me could say, well, you can still play, you just shouldn't go out and play in front of people if they're not going to value what you play. And they're right, because, you can rehearse with people, you can have jam sessions, you can do all that, but there's something really nice about having an audience too. So I've found my own accommodation, I suppose, with that, the sort of the bad state of the financial rewards for music, and I'm in a fortunate position too, where I'm not exactly relying on the money I make from playing to provide me with a living. So
that's a good position to be in.
I'm fortunate. Well, that's the retired position basically.
Yeah.
So I am fortunate.
Okay. Have you got any gigs scheduled over the next couple of weeks that you would like to announce here?
The Gympie Muster. I'm playing 4 shows at the Gympie Muster, which is the end of August. That's the big festival up at Gympie in the national park, about 30 k's inland from Gympie, which if it's raining can be an absolute mud fest like Splendor, or if the weather's good, it's fantastic. A lot of people camp there and set up their bars and their barbecues, and it's quite a scene. Anyway, that's a good fun festival to go to. It used to be called a country music festival, but they have all sorts now. Yeah, it's a real mixture.
Cool. And locally, any shows in the... Locally,
what am I doing? Yeah. I'm playing with a new band called Steam at the Byron Markets on Sunday.
Cool.
And that's Guy Cachel, Azzo Bell, Rex Carter, and myself, a quartet of all experienced musicians playing good funky country.
Please send
stuff.
my regards to Guy.
I will.
Lovely fella.
He is. Yeah,
he is great musician.
Yeah, and a good singer and a good harp player too.
Right.
Yeah.
And are you on social media these days? Do you have a website or any?
I'm on Facebook.
Any profiles?
I'm on Facebook. That's all.
Yeah.
But I'm not. I'm not really. I haven't got anything to sell really, other than just the gigs I'm doing. So
I see.
I don't set up a music page or anything.
But would you be open to, let's say, studio sessions if somebody needed?
I'm always available for studio sessions. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
but it just seems that a lot of people are doing their own stuff these days, and they don't particularly want a freelance electric or double bass player. Probably more for double bass because it's more of a rare situation. But there's a lot of guitarists who play bass, a lot of keyboard players who play bass. So people doing their own recordings don't usually want that sort of thing. The country music scene still does have a bit of a production line thing going where, some studios will concentrate on country music and bring in different bass players for different singer-songwriters,
Okay. Well, good. Look, if you're okay with this, I'd like to maybe put the social channels into the show notes. So
Sure.
if anybody wants to hire you for a studio session or for a live show, they can find you.
Contact me via Facebook,
That's it, via Facebook. Finish the episode, go to the show notes, scroll down and click the button. That's how easy it is. Rod, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us today. I think that's really enlightening. And, I wish everybody could just see the pure joy on your face when you share these stories. It's quite enlightening for me. Thank you so much.
It's been lovely talking to you, Jan. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers, mate.
Bye.
Wow, what an episode. So many great stories. Rod, thank you so much. I got a lot out of it for myself, and I really hope that all our listeners also enjoyed this episode. So thank you so much for sharing. Also, a big thank you to all of you, the listeners, for sticking around for now over 50 episodes. I think it's quite amazing to see that this podcast is going so well. So thank you so much. Please go to the show notes and visit Rod's social channels. Also, please subscribe if this is your first episode. And if you feel like it, head over to Facebook to the Production Talk podcast community to join and discuss episodes. Just a little reminder, an open invitation to everybody who's in the area on the east coast of Australia. If you feel like it, check out my new studio rooms. I'm super excited about it and would love to meet all of you in person if you can make it. Just hit me up. It's yarn@mixartist.com.au. That's YARN @mixartist.com.au. Or contact me on my socials on Insta or Facebook, send a message, and we can definitely arrange something. Okay, that's all for today. I hope you all have a fantastic week. I shall speak to you again in a week's time. That's all for today, and bye for now.